Everybody, can you see me? Can you hear me? Do let me know. Hi Laurie, Robin, and others. Do let me know when you can see me. Fab. Great, thank you, everybody. That's great. That's really good. So just bear with me one second. I'm just going to try something. Right, I don't know if that'll have an impact, but I've just turned the camera down because this video is private. Don't know, shouldn't be, but I can't change it now. So as long as you got the link to it, you better get in, and we can make it public at the end of the broadcast. I don't think you can change it whilst it's midway. So hope we're all well. Trying something a bit new today, never been done before live to my knowledge, so let's see how we go. And yes, Elton John was great. Yeah, I'd never seen him before, so it seemed like a good opportunity. It's his last tour, and funny enough, talk about things come to those who wait. Those tickets were bought 4.5 years to the day before which you saw him last night. It was a pre-COVID thing. My wife got them for me as a present, and so yeah, that took a long time to come about. So with COVID, I think did he fall over and break his hip or something, Elton John? He had some kind of accident, so it's all rather kind of truncated, and so as a result of which the tickets were bought actually in 2018, and we finally got to see the show in 2023. Absolutely, Elise. Yeah, definitely. And you know, I'm not saying I'm a huge Elton John fan. I mean, I've always liked him, and what was nice is I knew probably 80%, 85% of the songs, which was great. Lots of hits, lots of really well-known ones. So just somebody to say, yep, saw him. You know, these huge big stars, they're all getting old, aren't they? You know, that kind of generation. You know, people who sort of kicked off in the 60s, and big in the kind of 70s. You know, they're all in the 70s. I think he was about 76, 77, something like that. You know, so you know, it's obviously the last chance, isn't it, now in the next sort of couple of years to see these kind of real kind of giants. It's not to say that there won't be others that may get equally as big, but I'm not sure whether they'll have the same kind of impact. I think music is much more diffuse now, isn't it? But I think we're about on 5 o'clock. So I am going to say it's a bit cold, I thought it was going to be, so I might at some point put down the gimbal and put my jumper on, but we will go. Back in piano player, I think a lot of them do, don't they? Pick up musicians in the first instance, and then obviously work on their own stuff in the kind of meantime. So what was nice was he had his old band with him as well. You know, the band that had been playing with him, essentially, the nucleus of the band had been playing with him since the early 70s. So there's a hell of a lot of old, heaven knows what the combined age of his band was, but they'd all been together for a long time, so that was great. So, welcome one and all. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, welcome wherever you are. You're joining me here in York. And hi Satyam, hi Catherine, Tish, Adrian, Lynn, lots of familiar names. Susan I saw on as well. I think Robin's here as well. So Natalie's here. Hi Natalie, thank you for your nice comment. So yeah, I thought we'd do something a bit different today, insofar as that we've done the city walls and we've done it over 3 separate tours. But I thought today, just for an experiment that might go horribly wrong, I might run out of phone battery, who knows. We'll try and do the whole lot in one go and try and come off the walls a little bit, show you some kind of interesting bits and pieces, how it all kind of links together, and try and get a real kind of understanding of what the walls were, where they kind of come from, their origins in Roman history, in Viking history, with the Normans and so forth. So I thought the good place to start actually was here at, let's get there, up at one of our favourite spots, our regular spots here, which is the remains of the Norman castle. So the castle, as we know, first built in wood by William the Conqueror, was a symbol of the conquest of England and the attempted conquest of the north, following on from 1066. But as we discussed on quite a few of these tours, it wasn't a straightforward matter, because Jorvik was a Scandinavian, a Viking stronghold, and so it took several attempts, not merely to take York, but to hold it. But once William had done so in 1069, he's said to have built 2 castles. And that's right, there's a roof that's now on there, Mark. Yeah, absolutely 100% right. You can just see it up at the top, you might just see a little roof, but there's a nice walkway around now, so it's well worth a second visit. So the mound itself does actually date from the Norman period. So the earthworks, obviously piled up there to create the great kind of vantage point, because actually it's rather flat around here, is Norman. But the castle you're looking at is actually dating from the medieval period, not least because we know it was destroyed on at least 3 times by fire, one of which of course involving the massacre of the Jews in 1190. So you're looking at a castle that dates from the 13th century, but precisely on the location where the Normans built it. And what we're going to do is going to follow the line now of the walls around over the rivers, try and give you a full sense, if you like, of the defensive structure of York. So what's kind of important to note was that immediately upon building these 2 castles, William dammed up the rivers to create, we're about to cross one river, the other river, the Foss is sort of behind, we'll cross that right at the end of the tour. But in damming up the Foss, what he did was he created a moat that came all the way around the city. So it's important to recognise that the walls are in sections, and it isn't that there are missing parts. I mean, there are 1 or 2 missing parts. I'll tell you when we kind of get to those, because some bits were destroyed to allow roads and so forth to be built. But for the most part, the walls are complete. We've got 3.4 kilometres to walk, and probably do more than that, because I'm going to come off the walls and show you some interesting buildings kind of along the way. So it's kind of worth thinking about, though, the fact that by creating a floodland around it, by creating a moat, that was another form of fortification. We'll see an image of that when we get onto the walls on the other side of the river. We just need to first cross over the river. And hello, Leslie. Glad to hear that you're on. Yes, subscribe. Yes, please do things like that I always forget to mention. Give it a like, give it a subscribe, so that hopefully other people can find the video. After we go through, I think we'll go through the park today, actually. So all this area we're walking through here would have been flooded. So it isn't that there's a section of the walls missing, but rather the river and the moat kind of combined to create an area whereby you can only obviously approach by water, and that you then have heavily guarded passages to prevent boats coming in. So big chains were run through the water to prevent the Viking longships. Because of course the longship was the tool, the piece of sort of crack technology, if you like, that the Vikings had pulled together to transfer men, arms and their supplies across the North Sea. By water, in the direction you're looking at, we'll look at the river in a minute, it's about 350 miles to Denmark, so really not that far. And by the combination of rowing and sailing, in other words, wind from sails, but also oars, the Vikings really could make mincemeat of a distance like that. And once it came to spring tides and the weather was good, they'd undertake these kind of journeys in a matter of days. It really was a kind of surprisingly quick. We sort of think of things taking a long time, but it really wasn't the case. And so it was never really a case of saying you'd beaten a Viking army, merely you've beaten that one, and you can expect others are going to arrive in short order. That's the kind of nuisance of being sort of pretty close. So let's come up onto the water side now. Have a look. So looking out across the water side to the kind of left-hand side of the picture, this is the way out to sea, to the Humber estuary, to the North Sea. So 40 miles from here, you can see the river in a minute. So 40 miles in that direction, you've got the North Sea. So this is the route to what they call the Humber estuary, the large estuary where the water sort of flows out to. And so this was the route in for the Vikings. So what was incredibly important for William the Conqueror, once he'd taken and conquered and held York, was to secure this entrance to the city. And he did so by building a series of forward defences which kind of narrowed the river down, and then ran chains through the river. So in effect, only smaller landing craft could come through. The gates were simply too narrow for the longboats, for the Vikings, and chains were there to prevent any kind of attempt to kind of smash your way through. It also, of course, worked as a taxation point. And even to this day, we see kind of remnants of the idea of waterways. See the bonding warehouse over here, just on a kind of centre of the picture now. So bonding warehouse, we're paying taxes, taxation points, and so these walls were very much used as well for the collection of duty. A little bit grey right now. I just say it's going to be clear sunshine. So hopefully these, over the next couple of hours, the sky's going to open up. So it's important to recognise this bridge wasn't here. At the time, it's known as Skeldegate Bridge. Skelde, Nordic, means shield makers. It is the bridge of the shield makers. We'll come into Skeldegate when we come up onto our first section of York's walls. It's the street of the shield makers. So of course the shields, the Viking shields, are very distinctive, round, big iron boss in the middle, like a big fist. You just punch with your shield. It wasn't just a defensive weapon, it could be an offensive weapon too. And this section of wall here is missing. I said I'd mentioned some of the areas where walls are missing. This was taken down by the corporation in the early part of the 19th century. It was falling down, but they were then sued by the Archbishop of York, because historically the Archbishop of York has responsibility for the walls. So the council were forced to rebuild. So this first tower we've come into on Bailey Hill is actually a Victorian rebuild, as is the staircase getting us up to the wall section. So as we kind of pan across, I'm just going to move us across to here. What date are we talking about when the chains crossed the river? I was wondering what the chains would have been made from. Oh, well, almost certainly iron. Forged iron links. The Vikings themselves, of course, were master iron workers, Mark. The Iron Age, of course, dates back, 1500 years or so. So, very, very strong chains of iron. So blacksmiths would kind of bring them together in links. So there would have been a wall section here, down to the river. The postern tower, water tower, would have been located just down, so roughly about where we are now, with these kind of trees in front of us. So this, as I say, is Victorian. Very nice, very attractive, but let's just understand the difference between, if you like, the authentic sort of medieval and the kind of Victorian additions, because obviously an awful lot of this is authentic 700-year-old walls, but equally things like the walking, the promenades were added by the Victorians, just so it's a kind of leisure thing. So here we are. This is the map of what we're going to do today. We've started off by the castle. We've already got to Bailey Hill, so we're now going to go all our way around to Micklegate Bar, near the station. Lovely Minster views over here. We're coming off, have a look in the gardens if we can get in. Bootham Bar, round to kind of Monk Bar, over and across. We've got a section where we walk here, because again it's been flooded. You see here, I was talking about with the water. So again, a flooded area by the museum, a flooded area down here called the King's Pool. We'll then pick it up by the Red Tower and finish up by Fishergate Bar and a Fishergate Postern in about an hour and 50 minutes, if we've still got the battery. So just talking about the section that's kind of missing there. That's a picture of it. This is a bit that's been kind of knocked down. The river just sort of behind us. So you see the river coming down here. So this is the section that's kind of missing now. That's kind of knocked down. So that's good to see. So have we got any more questions before we take off? Hope you're feeling fit and active. We've got a long walk ahead, but it's a great walk, and it's certainly a nice day for it. So as we climb up these stairs, we are going up the second mount. So just picture now, if you will, the mound where Clifford's Tower, York Castle, stands. We've got another mound just here. This is called Bailey Hill. And so Bailey Hill is the second of two castles built by William the Conqueror to hold York after he secured it from the Vikings. So it's worth mentioning that there's only London that had two castles, that and York. So it really gives you a sense of the importance that William and the Normans placed. It's important to say the Normans, not the French. Two different things. The Normans actually were related to the Vikings, believe it or not. So it's a bit of a family squabble. So this path here takes us up onto the ridge, where we can get a sense. Obviously this time of year it's not quite as easy because all the foliage is out, but I can tell you we're high up here. If I kind of pan through on this side, we'll see hopefully the rooftops quite a way below us. You eating any jimmies, Amanda? Are we enjoying it? So you can see we are above the rooftop line up here. So, and you might just be able to see, if I kind of pause about there, if I give it a little bit of zoom, can you see through the trees. It's awkward colour to see because it's obviously pale stone. You probably can't, but you see a bit of the court building over there, and the castle is in that direction over there. So in effect what we've got then is two castles facing each other across the river. And of course the benefit of that is that, as I say, the chains can be put in, but also then these sort of secondary defences could run from the castles. So to create, you know, a castle, battlements, water controls, gateways, chains, a really kind of sophisticated defence. That you think, well, fantastic. So you can now sort of control flow into the city. But actually William had other things on his mind. The importance of York was not lost on William any more than it was lost on the Romans, the Vikings. They all recognised it was the supremely important city area to hold, to control northern and eastern England. But William's view simply was it was more trouble than it was worth. So William didn't so much want to hold York for its own sake. He wanted to prevent the Vikings from ever regaining control. So he actually set about a policy that now you describe as a war crime. No two ways about it. He launched a very controversial policy that was known as the harrowing of the North. And this starts off with the destruction of property, principally at waterside properties, quaysides, docks, jetties. Anywhere you can land a boat is destroyed. They then move on to barracks, places where you might be able to keep an army. Then grain stores, places where you could feed people. And then the destruction of fields. So in effect what this does is it causes a huge wave of starvation, hunger, poverty, which we think led to somewhere in the region of 15 to 25,000 deaths. Very, very difficult, of course, in modern eyes to be able to work out what they would be, but estimates suggest this. And in doing settlements for the Vikings kind of going forward, but of course at an unbelievably high cost. And this cost, it's said, weighed very heavily on William, who was supposedly a devout Christian and was very concerned about his soul. And so in an act of penance shortly before he died, he bestowed a great sort of fund of money on the city, which was used to build St Mary's Abbey, which we'll probably get a glimpse of the Abbey as we're kind of walking around sort of today. So that was kind of how William sort of sold it to himself. So there is a new sort of section of wall here, well not new, but repaired section. Very high up scale. It's not really high up really, it's not scary, we're just used to it really. So there's a couple of nice interpretation boards just here, which go back to what we were talking about earlier with, as you can see, the section of how water is being used in terms of the two castles, the Motte and the Bailey over here, as you see. So you can see this on the site of Clifford's Tower, we've been a few minutes ago, and this sort of Bailey Hill. So you can see then how the defences sort of continue down, create lots of alleyways and so forth. So, you know, and then we've got other bridges up at the kind of back here. So you've got a really kind of complete set of defences when you incorporate the flooded area. So again, we talked about the moat earlier. So again, this picture makes clear how the water is being used around the castle to kind of enhance it. So this section of walls here is recently kind of repaired. It's thought that loads of rubble was thrown down here when they were originally building these walkways. So when we look down here, the walkways now, very kind of nice and smooth, were put in by the Victorians. The path would be much, much narrower in the kind of medieval period for the soldiers. So it's thought that the builders just chucked a load of rubble down here, and that over time that rubble started to kind of move downhill, and it caused the yeah, of course, yeah, Tina. So what it did is it caused some movement, some settlement issues on this, which had to be kind of repaired. So all the kind of stonework around here has kind of been cleaned out, has been kind of repaired and sort of dug out. So we've got, you know, a really kind of nice now sort of clean sort of look, and none of this has been visible for about sort of 200 years until about, well, a year ago maybe. Over on this side, we talked earlier about obviously the predecessors of the stone walls. These aren't sort of medieval, so most of what we're looking at here is about 13th and 14th century. But before that, we've got wooden ramparts. So earthworks below it, you've got Roman walls. We'll talk about the Roman walls a little bit later on. So in the first instance, it looks much more akin to like what you call a fort or a kind of fortress. Particularly those that kind of think about the kind of North American sort of feel, the kind of the 18th century kind of fortresses and so forth, the Wars of Independence. Very, very similar. Hadn't kind of really moved on a sort of great deal from those. But of course, built in wood, they didn't survive. It's the stone that's kind of lived on. What we do know is that when we kind of look carefully, we can see what they call maker's marks. Now, I don't know how well you can sort of see from here because I don't have the zoom capabilities I used to have. But if I just kind of pan there, can you see right in the middle? There looks like a tent kind of image, like a triangle with an X on the top. If I try and hold steady, we're going to see Bitch Daughter Tower in just one moment. Yep. Can you see that? It's just like on its side an X with a line, like 11. Stockades, yeah, absolutely, that's a good way of putting it. Stockade, yeah. And this we know is a maker's mark. And the only other place that this is found is on the walls of the minster. Now, maker's marks basically were architects, they were stonemasons who would literally have a symbol that they put, like almost like a brand name, as you might say. And so, this we strongly suspect was a mason that was working on the minster, was pulled over here to work on the walls in 1320. After the Battle of Myton on Swale, which led to York being kind of sacked by the Scots, following a kind of disastrous battle where actually a lot of clerics were called up because there was no real army here as such, and so a lot of kind of men in holy orders fought and were killed at Myton on Swale. There was a great deal of sort of panic and concern. Obviously, it's time of kind of William Wallace and kind of Rob Roy and all these kind of people to kind of rebuild the walls. So we think that a minster kind of stonemaker was kind of pulled off, but that was only discovered in this kind of piece of work, in the last sort of 2 years or so. So it's kind of real nice to see. You see some sort of new stone that's kind of gone in, but mostly they've utilised the old stone. Bitch Daughter, yes, you did see that. Where does it say that? Does it say on the? I can't see. It must have it written down somewhere, unless you're all. I've got incredibly good memories. But yeah, Bitch Daughter Tower is just over here. It is our next calling point, as you might say, on our route. Yes, you absolutely do. So Bitch Daughter is the name that it is known as on the walls, the official kind of chronicle of York. It's the Bitch Daughter Tower. But we actually think that it's not as offensive term for a stroppy teenager, but rather from the French dormir, door to sleep. And it says it's a nightmare bedroom, is what we're told in kind of Norman French. This was the king's prison, high up on the walls, cold, isolated, damp, not a place to await being detained at somebody's displeasure, as you might say. So that's what we think the name comes from, to mean nightmare bedroom, a kind of jail cell. But it forms, of course, one of the kind of corner sort of interval towers. And I want to give you as well plenty of opportunities as well to just have a look at the walls from the other sides as we kind of walk along. Some of it historic, some of it kind of more modern, but all of it is, of course, York. And what it does show, of course, is the great urban sprawl that exists outside it. I mean, not sprawl on a huge kind of scale. We're not kind of Los Angeles sprawl, but nonetheless, York is not even close now to being defined by its city walls in terms of its kind of geographic sort of parameters. And it never really was truly. There was a lot of kind of farmland outside. But of course, a great deal, if I just give you again a bit of zoom here, you can sort of see, hopefully, all the rooftops are running away. I don't know how well you can kind of see that, but we've got a lot of going in nightmare bedroom. Imagine a father, absolutely into your tower, girl. But no, it's not from that. So over here we have a rather nice kind of floor inscription here. Again, symbolically, so Clifford's Tower on one side, Bailey Hill on the other, the river running in between the two. Just as a reminder of quite how unusual this was. In fact, there's no other instance of it anywhere on these islands. So it's a unique solution to deal with the challenges that York threw up. It was simply too much of a risk for William to leave it unguarded. So his solution, build the castles, destroy the land around, destroy and break away the kind of river access, and from that point onwards, York starts to grow. So consequently, with the exception of one building, which I hope we'll get a little view of as we kind of go along, there are no buildings in York that predate the harrowing. Such was the success, if you like, of William's ventures. Now, of course, we've got some lovely Victorian buildings that appear from all sorts of periods of kind of York's history. But there's only one building that survived. So that really does give you a sense of how York was, in effect, levelled to the ground. So this kind of deliberate act, as I say today, we would no doubt discuss it in terms of a war crime. It was certainly very, very hostile towards the non-combatant population of York and its kind of surrounding villages. But I guess it happened a long, long time ago, and people don't tend to think of it as anything other now than a piece of history. But it's certainly a very brutal treatment of the people. And as I say, it's not doesn't escape William. He is very much aware and is constantly, concerned about the impacts on his soul. And so he kind of lays down the money to enable the abbey to be built, to kind of salve his conscience. Just give you a little shot now, kind of looking along the walls. See the next interval tower kind of coming up. So we've got a series of interval towers that are going to punctuate. We'll stop at all the kind of main gateways, Micklegate Bar, the first of the four that's coming up sort of quite shortly. William the Bastard, yeah. Yeah, William the shit, isn't he? But it's different kind of. Obviously, what we can't do is apply modern sort of moral sort of judgments on historic things, particularly about 1,000 years ago. But nonetheless, it does seem especially kind of brutal, doesn't it, to treat people that way? But there we go. So our first interval tower. So interval towers, of course, allow for increased vigilance. It allows us to look along the walls. Because, of course, anybody trying to attack the walls is probably going to come up with ropes or ladders, so the ability to be able to look out along is a very kind of important part of your sort of defence strategy. And back now, a view all the way down to Bitchdorf Tower, over there on our left. So we better get on, because I think we're already best part halfway in, and we've barely put a dent into the wall, so let's get a jog on. And so any questions that I've missed up until now? I'm just going to get a sip of water while we walk on up towards Micklegate Bar. And of course, the first of our 4 gateways today. And let's hope that we can get more in. I said 2 hours. I may would have been woefully optimistic on that, but let's see how we get. Let's see what we can do in 2 hours. We did complete circuits, so if we have to run, we'll get there. Next interval tower coming up. So the first of our kind of minor gateways, well, second actually, of course, Bailey Hill Gateway, is Victoria Bar. So Victoria Bar was opened up in 1838, and the reason it happened in 1838 was it was a tribute to Queen Victoria, and it was opened by George Hudson. And just would the walls have been higher in the days they were built for defensive purposes? Not necessarily, Mark. I think the height is kind of pretty much as is. I mean, if you actually sort of look down from here, you sort of look also way down. I think it's a pretty sort of substantial. They're about sort of 13 metres from the road level up, which is that's kind of going some. And attacking uphill, of course, is very, very heavy weather. So yeah, so that question as well then. But it's about 13 metres, Barbara, to the first bit of sort of grassland. So this gateway was opened up in 1836, Victoria Bar, and Queen Victoria come to the throne the previous year in 1837. So this was known as thank you, Michelle, that's lovely. So this was opened up, if you like, as a tribute to Queen Victoria, the new young queen on the throne. But also, it's important to kind of recognise that these gates were seen as income generators. That the guy who maintained the walls was called the murage master. From the same word mural, walls like wall art, mural, and murage was money generated by taxes paid to enter the city were used to maintain the walls. And what we know is that when this gate was opened up in 1838, so you can see Victoria Bar, you'll be able to see up there. I'll just try and give a. So it's not as easy as it used to be to zoom. There we go. So Victoria Bar, public subscription in the year 1838 by George Hudson. But what we know is that from the records is that when they were digging this, they found the remnants of a medieval gateway that was already here that had been bricked up. So it suggests they call this was a lonely bar. And what they mean is that very few people were using it. And that we know that the toll rates were a penny to enter this gate with a trolley, although that was cut in half if the trolley had been loaded in Yorkshire, it was a halfpenny. And for livestock, it was 4p a head. So in other words, the walls weren't simply about defence, they also created taxation points. If you're coming in to York to sell your produce at market, to bring your trolley, bring your livestock, you're going to pay before you arrive. So consequently, it guarantees that the city gets its shell. So the people that controlled the gateways of the walls, people that control bridges, it was a form of income. But if that income wasn't great because not enough people were using the routes, it wasn't at all uncommon to kind of close up access. And so that's obviously what happened in the medieval period, which is why there's a big gap, and that gate opens up again in 1838. So the most recent of the gates in the walls. So we have another interval tower coming up on our left hand side, and then lovely flowers, a glorious colour. Come on, I'm waiting for this sunshine to come out. I was promised bright sun. So I mentioned earlier that almost all the buildings, in fact all buildings except one, were destroyed by William the Conqueror. You can just see, hopefully, the top of the church of Bishop Hill, St Mary Bishop Hill Senior. If I just pan across, you might just see as well spire of St Mary's, the central tower and the twin towers of the Minster, all in the kind of same shop. So the spire of St Mary's, the Minster, rebuilt after the flattening of York. This tower, though, survived. And what we know is the construction was about 1000 AD, so during the Viking period of occupation, using stones from the Roman fortress. So it really has kind of got the DNA of York in that tower, St Mary's Bishop Hill Senior. And we don't quite know why it managed to survive. There's no kind of record because, as we say, William ordered the levelling of York, so there's no reason why it should have survived. But for whatever reason, it did. Maybe the marauders were Christian and they didn't quite have in the hearts to smash another church. Who knows for what reason? But that, if you like, is the only reminder that we have of pre-Norman conquest York. Everything else is subsumed within. So for example, if we're talking about the Roman walls, and we're going to see a section of the Roman walls a little bit later on. Hi everybody. So sorry, I'm back. Can you see me? Can you hear me? I have no idea what happened there. Lost a lot of people. Can you tell me that you can see me? Or that you can hear me? And oh, we're still there. Hi. Yes, can you see it? Sorry about that. Never happened with that before. It just completely died. You've got whirring wheel of death. We've done that walk on the walls so many times. No idea. You can't see me yet? I'm just going to let the chat kind of catch up. But hopefully people can see and hear me. And yes, you can see you. Fantastic, Emily and Carol. I don't know when that was written because obviously I'm not quite sure. He's back. Fantastic. So, beautiful. So thankfully, sorry, people have lost a lot of people, but hopefully they'll kind of come back. So that's lovely. Yeah, so sorry about that. I don't know what happened. We just kind of lost it. So anyway, let us restart the tour. So we are now in front of the first of our main gateways, Micklegate Bar. Well, it's imposing. We've got 4 gateways. The royal entrance to the city. We see the royal crests. The royal crest in the centre, either side. York's crest across St George with the 5 lions representing the 5 Vikings, the magistrates, defended the city in 1067. And good, thank you. Let's hope it stays that way. And the bottom crest is the crest of the Lord Mayor who renovated the bar in, we see, MDCC, so 15, 16, 17, 27. So in 1727, this bar was fully kind of renovated. But this is the historic Micklegate Bar. Micklegate, the main street into the city. If I'm going to spin us around, you'll see the road leading out of York is the road to the south. And so this is the connection with London. The main route by road heads down in this direction. So it's this gateway that every monarch since William the Conqueror, most recently King Charles III, earlier this year, came through this gateway. He was met by the civic party, the Lord Mayor, the Sheriff, the Mace, and the Sword Bearer. And on this spot, the monarch is presented with the Sword of York, which dates from 1447, and it's pointed downwards. They touch the sword, which acknowledges York's independence, and then they're allowed to pass into the city unmolested. This most recently happened King Charles and Queen Camilla just a few months ago. But this royal gateway, of course, has a dark history, as many of you will have heard on my tours before. This is the site where, coming into York, the bar walls, in particular Micklegate Bar, will be decorated by heads of traitors. And traitors, of course, generally speaking, were aristocrats. So Richard, Duke of York, he who gave his name to gave battle in vain, that one, his head was up there. Lord Percy Hotspur, his head was up there. Most recently, in the 1730s, the heads of 3 Jacobite rebels were up there, one of which was stolen. A tailor served 4 years in prison, but he never revealed where it was. So we're looking down into Micklegate, predominantly Victorian and Georgian architecture. Micklegate meaning great, so great street, Mickle meaning great. We'll pass through, single might just drop here for a moment. And this rear section of the walls actually built in 1827. So the archway underneath is Norman. The front section is medieval, 13th and 14th century. But this rear section built on here actually dates from the 1820s. So it's kind of important to kind of recognise that much of the walls have been adapted, have been shaped over time, so that each one, if you like, has got its own history. It's not simply a case of the whole thing is frozen in aspect. It's a history that's evolved around the needs of the city, but also around the views of the externals. Because this gateway, we know, you can see here, just come around so I see hopefully the blue and red crest in the middle there, the crest of King Henry VII. When he walked through this archway, he was festooned with red and white rose petals. The reason for this is this was Henry's first visit to York. It was the year following the Battle of Bosworth. And the Battle of Bosworth in 1485 is a key event in English history, because at that battle, the notorious King Richard III died. You remember the "My Kingdom for a Horse"? That's the Battle of Bosworth in Shakespeare's play, King Richard III. And so what it saw was the dynastic shift from the Plantagenets, who of course were the Dukes of York, very, very close to the people of York, and instead now with the Lancastrian, or rather more precisely the Tudors, came to power. And so York was frowned upon at this time. Its allegiances were being questioned, its judgment was being questioned. And the Tudors took a great deal of time and effort to begin to clip the wings of York. So it really was, if you like, the beginnings of the end of York as an incredibly powerful, influential city. And that role probably lasted for another sort of 400 years. Albeit, of course, it was a very fashionable play centre for the Georgian rich. But that was a tiny proportion. And these were people who made their money elsewhere that enjoyed partying. It wasn't really until the arrival of the railways that York, once again, was able to recapture something of the power, the wealth, the authority and the influence that had been lost as a result of backing the wrong horse in the War of the Roses. So this area sort of coming into probably one of the least attractive from the walls, but nonetheless is interesting as we kind of pan our way across. We're going to look at the station in a moment, but away into kind of distance. Hopefully you can sort of see a lot of York running away there for a couple of miles from where we are here. This tall brick building that dominates the section of Queen Street is the Railway Institute. It's formerly the site of a pub, but it was rebuilt as a place of improvement. This is very much in the era where the Quakers were in evidence in York, and they believed giving people positive activities to do. So sports, music, amateur dramatics, and so forth was very much taking the order of the day. Get them out of the pubs and get them doing something of use and of value. So this side of York is totally dominated by the railways, and in fact up until the early 1990s York was a major railway building centre. When I was at school, a lot of people left school and went into apprenticeships working in engineering. So all this site in front of us, where there's a huge kind of redevelopment site behind the station, was basically all the British Rail engineering works. And trains that went all over the empire were built here in York. So York and railways has got this kind of absolutely... Rail Museum, Susan, well that's just kind of the Rail Museum is sort of behind the hotel over there, about kind of 5-10 minutes walk away from where we are now. And this archway here in the walls is one of the first bits of evidence of how the railways impacted York. Because George Hudson, who by this stage was mayor and was obsessed with bringing the railways to York, because whilst others saw the railways as a fantastic way of moving coal, had been bought by ship and by barge, now it can be put on trucks and go by rail, it can be moved close to the industrial production centres in the Midlands and the South. But George Hudson saw this other benefit of moving people. He envisaged mass transport. And this simply didn't exist historically, mass transport. It wasn't a thing at all. So this we're looking at here is York's second station. We'll look at the first one in a moment. And with these 800-foot long platforms, which are going to run right the way down here, you see incredibly long trains pull in. When this opened, this was the largest station anywhere in the world. It opened in 1877. So again, a prestige station. You have to kind of go in to kind of fully appreciate the architecture of the station. I'll show you a couple of sort of highlights as we go along. But the first station was over on this side, it was within the walls. So George Hudson, who became a notorious figure, actually was a draper. He was a clothier in his first kind of line of career, and working in kind of cloths. But he very much saw the potential of the railways, and he became very, very adept at raising the capital. And what's kind of clear about the railways is you can very quickly do easy bits of railway building, and you can make a lot of good profits. But then you start to get to some of the bits that are less easy and more tricky, if you like, from an engineering point of view. And it was said that he wasn't entirely frank with these investors that were expecting these easy rewards. And so I suppose the modern term for it is a bit of a Ponzi scheme. He was taking the money from new investors to pay back, if you like, the interest, the dividends, the old investors, and eventually, of course, these kind of schemes have a habit of collapsing. I'm just kind of showing you this because this is the Hudson Quarter. I'm not at all keen, if I'm being honest, in terms of modern architecture. It's okay at best, but it's kind of interesting that George Hudson now has a Hudson Quarter, a George Hudson Street, because that was far from the case in his day. George Hudson, the man who had put about building about 40% of England's railway, known as the Railway King, was finally captured. He was put on trial, although didn't quite stick, but nonetheless he had owed a lot of people a lot of money, so he ended up in debtor's prison. So So in those days, if you couldn't pay your bills, you went to jail until you could. So showing again here on the walls, we've got a section here. Yeah, it's lovely for a steam train ride on North Yorkshire Moors. So the old railway station is just over here where the council buildings are, and the old signal box apparently located just down here, this little house here. So a rather cute little house was the signalman's little home and signal box. So as we start to walk along here, we're going to get nicer and nicer kind of views of the Minster, which is kind of fantastic before we sort of come off. We've completed our first section of the walls. So George Hudson ended up in disgrace. This, by the way, is really the sort of prettiest part of the station we're coming to now. Featuring arches, the Royal Station Hotel, which again dates from the 1870s, once stayed in by Queen Victoria. And below us as well, in what was a sort of moat running alongside, so again you can sort of see how the walls kind of run down. You can come out here, you get an angle, you get a sense of quite how pretty imposing these kind of defences were. A moat at the bottom then became the graveyard for York's cholera victims in 1832, when an epidemic was responsible for killing about 450 people here in the city. They placed the bodies outside the city walls for fear of kind of contamination. But it was very, very difficult to get people to carry the bodies. And so many of the bodies would be tipped into the river. And the river, of course, was the source of drinking water. So it really became a real problem. The cholera burial ground is just sort of down in front of us. We'll pass it just in a moment or two. So you've got the Royal Station Hotel there. As you can see, really lovely entrance canopy there into the middle of the station, and then the beginning of the station arches. It really is a triumphant kind of Victorian building. And built by Thomas Prosser, a great visionary architect. The North East Railway Company also did Durham Station, Harrogate Station, Newcastle Station. So he's really got a kind of a style, an awful lot of kind of decorative metal. He really loved to kind of have a really kind of ornate designs. And he would have very much been at home in the building coming to view now on our kind of right hand side. Now this dates from the Edwardian era. It dates from 1906, so a little after George Hudson's time, but it's the wealth, if you like, that has now begun to formalise within the railways, leads to when they need a head office building, they build this gargantuan scale. We'll see that in just a few more minutes as we kind of come closer. But this now is the site of the first railway station anywhere in York. These rather lovely bike sheds behind the council offices is part of the construction of the original station. And the platform would run right on the bottom. You can sort of see a high wall there, and then the ground is lower on the other side, which indicates where the kind of platform side was. So this was the first station that opened in the late 1830s and operated for about 30 years as York Station. The front section of this building here is also part of the original building. But it was quickly realised it wasn't a good fit. What you really wanted was a through station, because George Hudson had argued for all the trains to come to York. And the reason for that is on the coach route, it's literally about halfway between London and Edinburgh in an almost straight line. That's maybe 20-mile dogleg to come to York. But essentially, London, York, Edinburgh is a natural kind of flow of things. So consequently, having got all the trains coming in, they then created a bit of a mess because they had to come in and reverse back out again, which wasn't kind of ideal. So it was soon realised that needed a what we call a through station, which is what the new station was. So this is the cholera burial ground, by the way, down here. We're talking about the cholera burial ground. That's down there. The yew trees define it. It's about 450 victims in there. Most don't have marked graves because most people were simply too poor to have their graves marked. But that was outside the city walls. So this building, if you like, it reflects the splendour, the wealth, but also I think the kind of self-belief and the ambition of what the railways are kind of created in York was a sense of this kind of absolute kind of revival, bringing York back to where it should be, if you like, in the position as being, you know, the number one centre of the north. But just sat alongside it, of course, another monument. This was built in 1906, of course, just before the First World War, that within 10 years would have a devastating impact, not least on the railway company itself, because the Great War of 1914-1918 was what we call the first mechanised war. The railways were used extensively to move troops around, particularly up to the kind of front line. So down through England, across in France, many of the train operatives, the train drivers, service engineers, etc., were brought into the forces to transport troops. The Germans, the Axis forces, were very much aware of course significance of the railways, and so they did what they could to sabotage, to attack, and it was very, very dangerous work to be associated with the railways. And in this national monument here to the railway workers that died, lost their lives in the 1914-1918 war, you can see, I think, the grandeur, the importance that is put against that sacrifice. So we've kind of got two buildings. One, if you like, a celebration of the success of this kind of project. We see the money that's been spent, it's now a 5-star hotel, has been lavished upon this building, which is really an HQ. And sat right underneath it, this tremendously moving, I think, First World War monument. So kind of a nice kind of pairing there, kind of reflecting York's kind of railway history, is it created an awful lot of wealth, but also an awful lot of people laid down their lives to make that work. So we're coming to the sort of end of the first section. The Minster is coming into view. We're going to come down by the riverside. So again, we talked about how the walls, if you like, created sections in between the rivers. So we've now got a section of river where there's no walls, but of course what we can do is we're going to have a look next at the Roman walls. So we're just going to come to the end of it. It's getting a bit busy because it's rather narrow down this section, so let me just kind of get us down here. And those familiar with my tours with York, the Perky Peacock is about to pop up on in front of us. The Perky Peacock is a wonderful place for a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, whatever you like. Sit by the riverside, a cake, a bun, something nice to eat, and just kind of allow the day to kind of flow by. York's that kind of place. For those that have been, you'll kind of know we've got a nice slow pace of life here. So if you don't have to rush, don't. Will be my kind of advice for anybody that's visiting York. And if you want to find somewhere nice to sit and allow just time to pass you by, sitting in the Perky Peacock, pretty good. So again, some just clues really now about the river. We've got the pub, the Maltings, over here. This road's called Tanner's Moat, sorry. And the tanners, of course, are leather workers. So leather workers worked by water, an awful lot of water for their trade. And the fact that the Perky Peacock originally was called the Barker Tower gives us another clue to that. So this is right at the end of this wall section here. The bridge you're looking at dates from the early part of the 19th century. It certainly didn't exist in the medieval period. What you had again was two towers. One here, the Barker Tower, which you'll see, I'll come back look up in a moment. The Lendl Tower on the other side. And there was a ferryman, a boatman that carried people from one side to the other. Yeah, Robin, it's pretty similar. New York, definitely. He said that Florence Nightingale travelled on this ferry. So here's Barker Tower, the Perky Peacock, which is lovely, flags everywhere. So you can go and sit down there by the river. So again, this was another taxation duty point. The opportunity to put chains across the rivers and make sure that anybody coming in was paying the rightful fees, particularly if they're obviously bringing in goods they wanted to trade and sell and so forth. So Barker Tower originally was known as, because of the bark used in leather tanning. So the bark is used to, I don't know exactly what it does. Is it tannin, I think? The bark adds to the process, which kind of treats the hides of the animals, which creates, in effect, leather. So it's kind of quite easy, isn't it, to imagine little ferry boats running from one side of the river to the other. And it obviously did very, very well, because the ferryman, or one of the ferrymen, built up Lendl Tower. If we just look sort of a third of the way down on the left-hand side, right in the central picture now, I would see a bit of a like grey lead roof. Well, that's the original roof, because it would have been pretty much identical to this tower. It's a lovely Perky Peacock, this little witch's hat type thing. Yeah, tannin like tea, absolutely, yeah. Same thing. So I think is it the acid in tannin that treats it? Anyway, So obviously enough money was made of working the barge to build up. So instead of the small tower, we end up with the rather splendid 14th century Lendl Tower. So crossing the river. So again, this is the, if you like, the end of the walls here. But they continue. We can't walk on them in this next section. But don't worry, we're going to show you everything there is that you need to see. Because this is where the walls start to take on sort of quite a different sort of shape and formation. And we pick up our journey actually by the museum gardens. I don't think the library gate is going to be open for us to see that way. So, and this is the best preserved section we're coming into of the Roman walls. So when we think about the walls, we tend to now reflect on the Norman set of walls, but actually they were built onto and around the original Roman set of walls. So we're going to have a look and see if we can get in the gardens. We're going to have a look down there. Otherwise, we'll come in through the gardens. If they're whatever 6 o'clock, the gardens are shut, so we can't. So we may get in this bit, but I can't guarantee it, I'm afraid. They shut far too early. I think on a weekend in summer, 6 o'clock is rubbish, isn't it? So anyway, the best preserved section of Roman walls are just behind where we are right now. The St Thomas's Hospital, St Leonard's Hospital rather, is built in to the Roman. So hopefully we'll be able to at least see some of the Roman walls. We kind of come around this corner here before we go back across to Bootham Bar and join the walls proper. So the Minster chiming 6 in front of us. So I do apologise earlier say about that dropping signal, but here you can see hopefully this wall here is Roman wall. Video jerky now buffering. Okay. It looks all right to me here, so maybe that's moved on a little bit. Could have been people. So you're able to just see. It is really early, isn't it? If I go in back like this, if you can just see in the brickwork there, the herringbone pattern. Can you see that? Distinctive Roman herringbone pattern. So we know that this is Roman wall. And all the section around, unfortunately, we can't see too well. We've got the multangular tower into the corner here. The Roman tower is so I'm just trying to get there. So that bit of wall you can just see stuck up at the top, that is actually the corner of the Roman tower. So the best preserved section of the Roman walls sit behind 2 sets of locked gates. So they really are conspiring against us being able to enjoy the Roman walls today. But nonetheless, I know there's at least one more section that we can definitely see, and we will head towards Bootham Bar and get back on the walls and see how the next section. So we come from the south, so we'll come right the way round to the northern side now. So with the Minster in front of us, we're going to come back onto the walls up at Bootham Bar. Bootham gets its name, by the way, from market stalls, from booths. All the area around the gateway on the road into York was characterised by market stalls or booths. So basically, it was a commercial area, and that was because we've passed on our kind of way up the road into York from London, from the south. By contrast, the next route is going to be the route from Scotland, and from the north, the Great North Road, the A1, the A19. So of course, an awful lot of good, a lot of trade would come from the north. It was the route the Romans took to Hadrian's Wall. So of course that meant that was somewhere where they could, I'm going to cross over and take advantage of this. So they could access 2 days north from here, the march to Hadrian's Wall. But what it did mean, actually I will cross over and we'll look at the section of the wall. What it did mean, of course, was that attacks could come from the north, and so you need to be vigilant, and there was all manner of security and protections against it, including famously a door knocker that all Scots needed to ring for the come in, or rather knock for the come in. So here is not terribly impressive, admittedly, but just in front of King's Manor, another section of Roman wall dating from about 100 AD. Yeah, the Queen of the Window is passed through by Thomas's. So we've got all manner of sections of Roman wall in this area. And what we can see is that wall would have continued straight across Bootham Bar to the right of our picture over here, is this section was demolished to create this thoroughfare to allow for traffic to come through. And in fact, by the beginning of the 19th century, there was a great deal of clamour to pull down the walls altogether. The reason for this is they're in a very poor state of affairs. The city walls, peppering them with cannons, causing a great deal of damage. And of course, this is really the end of the stone defensive systems. Once cannons came in and artillery, stone was as more dangerous as it was effective and useful, because equally it could just collapse on you and kill your defenders as it would keep out the attackers. So the idea was, they're falling down, let's pull them down, because they're kind of getting in the way of commerce. It's not easy to trade through these narrow medieval gateways. But thankfully, this chap here, William Etty, stepped up. Because William Etty was what we would now call an early romantic, insofar as that he was fascinated by the medieval period, which is quite unusual because the word medieval means the bit in the middle that nobody really kind of rated. It's sort of pre-era of Enlightenment. It was sort of seen as a period of kind of superstition and plague and ridiculous kind of behaviours associated with the medieval period. So consequently, for William Etty and his great friends, Walter Scott, who wrote Ivanhoe, the Waverley novels, they saw it differently. They loved the idea of kind of chivalry. So for them, the stories of, you know, King Arthur, Guinevere, Sir Lancelot, Robin Hood, Maid Marian, all these kind of stories inspired them. They loved this idea, quite possibly as a rejection of the Industrial Revolution. You know, the kind of dark satanic mills covering the landscape. So they looked back to this period of England, kind of pastoral, pre-industrial. And when they saw what York had, which is a city that had been in decline for the most part 400 years, to a very strong collection of walls, buildings, churches, we're going to preserve this, we're going to keep it. So when York Corporation applied to pull down the walls in 1820, William Etty and Sir Walter Scott ran a campaign that involved the first sponsored walk down to London to raise funds and raise awareness. And they won the argument. York was told not only must you repair the walls and keep them, you've got to make them good. So when we look at the walls today, what we're looking at is a Victorian rebuilding of the medieval, and of course the medieval is standing upon the Roman and older sections. So it really is a kind of hodgepodge of different history. You know, we've got, you know, all manner of different kind of periods sort of represented within this, but it makes for an enticing whole story. So we're now at Bootham Bar, and Bootham Bar, if you can sort of picture in here what Micklegate Bar looked like, it's a great deal more solid. It is nice actually, isn't it, Elizabeth? The whole thing just looks squat and powerful, it's muscular. Where Micklegate is elegant, this looks like a bruiser. And it's kind of no surprise really, because the whole thing here was about defending the city against these attacks, particularly from the Scots and the wars of independence that started in the 1290s with William Wallace and of course Robert the Bruce, sorry, not Rob Roy. And so you really get this aura now of a city that is bristling, if you like, for an impending attack. And those attacks came in waves. Through the period 1296 to 1319, they came on a very frequent basis. Not necessarily to conquer York and hold it, but raiding parties intent on coming in, taking cash, taking valuables, taking hostages, creating the wealth. So if we can just sort of come in on here, we start at the bottom, remember by York Castle. We're now right up at the top, Bootham Bar, roughly halfway on our journey. We're not doing too bad actually for time. We've got a lot more to do, but let's walk on, onwards and upwards. So Bootham Bar, as I say, was very much designed with defence in mind, and like the other bars would have had originally an extra gateway. When we get to Warmgate, you'll see what a barbican is. So just be aware that the gateway originally would have extended a good deal further out, probably to about where the traffic island is there in the middle. But we do get a rather nice view here of the art gallery, King's Manor, St Mary's Tower. So the walls on this side are the walls of St Mary's Abbey rather than part of the city walls. So quite different. So again, we can just see we've come from the bottom of the city down here. We've followed the way around, and we're now up near the top. When we get to Robin Hood Tower, we are at the top. And we swing around the other way. So let's walk on. Coming to High Petergate, a little view of the Minster, just peeking its way through. And the signal sometimes drops a bit in here, so I won't dwell too long. We get a fabulous view, of course, of the interior of the portcullis, the gateway of wood and iron that can be dropped down in short order, because as we sort of orientate and look down, what we can see, of course, is that these views give us an excellent view down the Great North Road. I can see the signals dropping, so I'm just going to pump out of there. And so if you had people coming down the Great North Road, you don't necessarily like the look of them, are they raiders, are they traders, you can just drop that gate. It buys you time. And you can then assess whether it's a situation of peril, or actually just one way you want to charge people taxes. And if you could see that gate, you could reach through. So quite easy, of course, then to pay fees, licenses, taxes through the gateway. So again, he's thinking about these two forms of purpose for the walls. On the one hand about defences, on the other about controlling access and ensuring the revenues are kind of paid. So we're now into the shortest section of the walls. This is the sort of section that, if people could do one section of the walls, we tend to do this one, because of course you get these phenomenal views of the Minster. And what's great about coming up on the walls to view the Minster is, at ground level, it's almost too much. Particularly for photography, you can't actually get it into one shot. It's too big. And the whole thing feels like it overpowers you. Whereas up on the walls, you sort of get a bit more of a kind of chance to begin to take it all in as a perspective on the kind of size and scale of the Minster. But also you really do get a sense of quite how it just dominates the kind of city sort of landscape. So again, it's a shame the skies aren't a little bluer today, but a wonderful view there. So we've got the two West End towers, the central tower, and a sort of peaked witch's hat, the chapped house roof on the left hand side. So we'll walk along, we're going to get several great views of the Minster from this side. So the Minster was actually built on the site of the former Roman fortress. The basilica at the centre of the Roman fortress was pretty much on the location where the Minster is now. Looks more elegant than security lights, yeah, absolutely. So consequently, the Minster, of course, the seat of power of the Archbishop of York, the second highest church official in the country since the early part of the 8th century. But before that, historically, you've got it as the provincial capital, the Roman fortress. And the Romans had built Hadrian's Wall. They came to York with the view that they were going to conquer all of northern Britain, including Scotland. But they soon realised that was an ambition that was never going to be fulfilled. They simply didn't have enough troops. But also, from their point of view, the return wasn't great enough. They were really rather kind of, how should we put this? They looked at it as kind of asset sheets. You know, what are we there to gain? What are the assets? And the assets the Romans were interested in principally were things like lead, tin, copper, gold. Well, they just didn't really exist, those kind of mineral deposits, in northern Britain. So consequently, the amount of lives prepared to lay down to take and hold territory that has almost no strategic value, no monetary value, has got to be limited on a kind of balance sheet. So consequently, for the Romans, it made sense, at least in the first instance, to build Hadrian's Wall. So Hadrian's Wall, 2 days march north of here, runs from, of course, the east across to the west, over at Carlisle, and that splits the country in half. I think there's this landmass. And for the Romans, it was the end of the world. The fortress they built here, the Roman fortress, which is kind of all this area is defined by the shape of the Roman fortress, was the kind of the last bit of civilization. It's as far north as the Romans ever got. So consequently, when we're walking along this route here, if you like, the external of the Roman fortress, this to them is in effect like the end of the civilized world. Of course, you've got Hadrian's Wall 2 days north of that, but that is the line that separates barbarity from civilization. This was behind the lines. And what we know is that for the Romans that were stationed at Hadrian's Wall, It was a terrible posting. They absolutely hated it here. These guys were Southern European. It was the practice of Romans that once they succeeded in conquering a nation, the best warriors wouldn't be sacrificed they'd be defeated, but they wouldn't be sacrificed. They'd be brought into the Roman army. But just to make sure they couldn't get involved then in any kind of sedition or uprisings, they would move to a different part of the empire. So consequently, the soldiers that were here in York were Spanish, Greek and Italian. They were Southern European. They wanted sunshine, olive oil, red wine, fresh fruit and vegetables, fresh baked bread. They wanted the Dolce Vita, and instead they got the cold winds and the driving rain of Hadrian's Wall. And whilst Northumberland is undeniably beautiful, it is not Southern Europe in terms of its climate. He said they invented socks at Hadrian's Wall, which is a lovely idea. They came in kind of sandals and came out wrapped like the Michelin Man. So it was a kind of culture shock for the Romans. So when they, and of course it's very dangerous. They were being forever attacked by these naked blue painted Scotsmen trying to cut them in half. So after this kind of stress and misery of being up at Hadrian's Wall for a couple of months, they'd come back to York. And what York offered was then a respite, okay? Where they could start with a shave, a bath, a massage. Let's not be frank, female company, right? Good food, wine, gambling, gladiators, horse racing. In other words, it was a soldier's paradise. But imagine how soldiers behave now. It's not changed. Particularly if you think this could be your last tour, you've no idea what is going to happen to you. Are you going to make it back next time? When you get that R&R, you've been paid your money in your pocket, then you're going to party. And so that's what York was. York emerged as a city that supplied the needs of these Roman soldiers that were back, if you like, on R&R from Hadrian's Wall, from patrol 18th century. And so this is Robin Hood's Tower, just behind us. Sorry, the signal's a bit poor here, but that's better. So this corner tower here, which represents that exact halfway point on the Walls Walk, is Robin Hood Tower. And we don't know precisely when it started being called Robin Hood's Tower, or even why. What we do know, though, is there's an invoice in the city archives in the early part of the 17th century that says repairs to Robin Hood Tower. So, at the very least, it's been known as Robin Hood Tower for about 400 years. Detective set in Newcastle and Northumberland. Oh, right, okay, I've not heard of that. Interesting, it seems that whenever we get these signal drops, I start getting multiple versions of text. We should look out for this, Leslie. So again, lovely view coming in then of the central tower of York Minster. I love seeing it like this time of year, with all the foliage around. And what's lovely about these kind of walks on the walls is that throughout the year, the vistas change, because as the foliage sort of becomes more dense, eventually obviously drops away, we get different views. So it's always nice to come, I think, at different times of the year and see it. Now, I did mention that these walls are substantially rebuilt. Actually, they are not terribly authentic. So we look at these, and it's been added really as a folly. The Victorians thought they looked nice, but they don't really reflect the original kind of medieval. This is much more about the Victorian ideas, like building almost Disney castles. But let's just kind of spin you out. It's a fantastic view from here, obviously, of the Minster. We get the full size, sort of scope of the Minster, from the West End towers, Central Tower, the Chapter House, the Great East End, all in view for the first time. Something you simply can't do from the ground is view it on these kind of levels. So this is another benefit, if you like, of walking the walls. So all this area within what we now call the Minster Precinct, the area to our right hand side, was the area, the location of the Roman fortress. So we're walking the lines of the Roman walls here. So of course they've been rebuilt. We're now walking on medieval walls, but the line, the orientation is precisely the same. So in many respects now we're walking in the footsteps of the Romans, which I think is just quite marvellous. I kind of love that idea that they were here almost 2,000 years ago originally. They left about 1,600 years ago, but they still define how we interact with the city on the basis that they've created this walkway, or not, they created the walkway, the walkway's been created to follow the lines that they kind of set. So I know the signal's not great around here, so I'm just sort of pushing along. I'm hoping by the time we get to the other side, it will be better. Oh, back up now. Just in time for what's widely known as one of the finest views in England, the view of the Minster, Gray's Inn Hotel, the Treasurer's House, Hoving, interview, an absolute I don't know what that means, Sandy, but if it's to do with me, I don't know, sorry. The harmony, I think, of this combination of buildings really is quite wonderful. Gray's Hotel incorporates parts of it that were first built in the Norman era, which is the longest substantially occupied building in York. What you're looking at there is Georgian, early Victorian on this side. We've got the Treasurer's House tucked in just behind. So it doesn't really just work together in kind of great harmony. It's perhaps no surprise, actually, that the person who owned this, a chap called Gray, who's a city solicitor, was dead set against this walk being opened up. Because what he had was the opportunity to create this walkway. So the walkway we're walking down here, all these bits were in the back of people's gardens. So consequently, some were quite happy to allow the council to create a walkway. Gray was dead against it. This was his bit of paradise. He had a lovely bit of medieval walk at the end of his garden. Why on earth would he want people walking on, gawping and looking into it all the way? So consequently, in effect, it would seem like he was bribed, because this was the last section of the wall that was opened up, and this enabled this promenade to be created from one end to the other. And the very next year, Mr. Gray became Lord Mayor of York. So I could be being cynical, but I suspect that there was something. Look at that lovely there. Is that laburnum? Is that what they call that? And the Minster together. Your thumb is numb. Screenshot's not the same. No, I know. You know, hopefully some solution will pop up at some stage. But we continue as a community. Better to have these friendships still intact, our travelling companions, than to have lost that as well. So we rebuild. And again, the east end now of the Minster coming into view, the great east end, the largest expanse of medieval stained glass anywhere in the world. It really is a lovely screenshot exchange for Chrome. Thank you, Tina. Perhaps you could pull up those details in the Live Virtually group for those who haven't had the opportunity to understand exactly what they can do. And don't forget to like the video. Thank you, Natalie. That's great advice. So the third of our gateways is coming up, Monk Bar. Of course, this being a monastic, religious area, but no great surprise, there's Monk Bar. So this actually is my favourite. It pretty should be. I'll look at the roses. I'll just stop for a minute and get the roses, because there's always time on my tours to stop and smell the roses, as they say. There you go. Foreground of roses, background city walls, rooftops of York. So the signal may well drop as it kind of go down. It's a very kind of narrow stone bit, but we'll be back again at the bottom. So we'll come back to the kind of northeast corner, now heading towards the kind of eastern side of the city. And a Monk Bar is probably my favourite, actually. It's a really good sort of museum of Richard III inside here, if anybody's been. And Richard restored this. He gave them money to kind of rebuild this gateway. He was, of course, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, but he's very closely associated with York. His brother, sorry, let's start again. His father had been Richard, Duke of York, ended with his head on a spike on Micklegate Bar. His brother was Edward IV, who was king. Initially, of course, he was the uncle to Edward. Sorry, the signal always sort of dips there. But if I can just sort of show you where I'm going to be walking down, you can understand perhaps why you wouldn't really expect to get an awful lot of internet signal. So yeah, so Richard had been Duke of Gloucester, the brother of the king. He's the uncle of the king briefly, but he declared the famous speech, "Bastard slips shall take no root," and declared Edward and his brother Richard to be illegitimate. And so he took the crown for himself in 1483 and became King Richard III, the brother of Edward IV, now became king. So he had this restored Monk Bar, my favourites of the gateways. Hi Linda. I know, we're very fortunate. And I don't know why, but it's just my favourite of all of them. I absolutely love Monk Bar. Again, we've got the Royal Crests and the gateways. I'll just give us a spin around for a minute for a vertical. For those that are able to take shots. It's got a finesse, but again, can you see the difference what I was talking about with Booth and Bar? Sort of like squat and solid. This one has got that sort of elegance to it. It's a really different feel. Yeah, the model shop, yep, just there. Monk Bar model shop, mark the blue building there. You'll also be able to see up here 2 gates either side that look like you went out of them, you drop down. You're going to see at the next gateway why they're there. They are residuals of what the Barbican should be. The Barbicans were pulled down in the period that I was talking about earlier with William Etty, who saved the walls. Before he managed to do so, they pulled down 3 of the 4 Barbicans. We've only got 1 left, we're going to see it the next stop. So we see the spikes there, the portcullis, once again, the beautiful kind of vaulted ceiling. So how are we doing for time? We're not doing too bad. So let's walk on. And up the other side of Monk Bar. Of course, in the old days, these arches wouldn't be in there. These have been opened up to allow traffic to kind of pass through, so you to come straight through this tower as a defending soldier. But onwards we go. So let's check our map again. Let's see what we've kind of got to. So we started down here, did we not? By Clifford's Tower, Bailey Hill, Victoria Bar. Remember we stopped at Micklegate Bar. We lost the signal between there and there, didn't we? We got you back. Walked around by the station, the Barker Tower, the Perky Peacock. We couldn't do this section here because of the close. We went in Booth and Bar. We've now followed up at the top, Robin Hood Tower, and we're now at Monk Bar. So we're now going to walk this next section, and then because this area was flooded in the medieval period, the King's Pool, there's now a gap. We'll pick up the journey again at the Red Tower to our final section. So we're well on our way, having done the first complete tour ever live, not on Hago. Oh, even better than that. So let me just take a sip of water. The whole map. I'll do it in the next section, Tina, because I've just come to the top bottom of the stairs, so we'll do that in a minute. When I come down to the next section, there's another map, I believe, so we'll do it then. So we're now the other side of Monk Bar. So again, we're going to get nice views of the eastern side of the Minster, the Great East Window. Great East Window, the largest medieval stained glass window anywhere in the world. 40% of England's medieval stained glass is in York Minster. So an absolute treasure. I think I have it, Elizabeth, yeah. An hour and a half in. I don't normally do that long a tour. I mean, an hour and a half's not that unusual for me. 2 hours, I've only done it once before. So let's see how match fit I am. I think York unlocked at about 2 hours 20. But I always think the battery's going to run out. So I'm never entirely confident about going on for sort of very, very long tours. No, I'm okay, Leslie. Walking wise, I'm absolutely fine. It's more, I just want to keep us to a kind of time scale because I know that you'll want to get other places too. I don't want to hold you up. So we get a lovely view coming in now of, firstly, some Roman remains. So you can see part of the Roman fortress down here, excavated. We'll just kind of go over here so you can see down in the ground. And I'm still young. That's all right, Linda. Honestly, I don't need a sort of physical rest. My voice is getting a little bit raggy, so I'll probably have more drinks of water. But isn't it lovely seeing excavated Roman buildings? Just kind of knowing that, as I say, all that separates is time. May I just get through? Excuse me, may I just get through? That's most kind, thank you very much. So we've got excavated Roman architecture. There's a church here, St Helen on the Walls, was just on the other side of here. But this building here is the Merchant Tailors Hall. And the Merchant Tailors, one of those kind of powerful mercantile groups in York, because the English economy was based on textiles, on wool, on both wool and also finished cloths. And English wool and English cloth was the best in Europe, the most in demand in Europe. And most of that top quality cloth came from the Pennine areas, from the Yorkshire Dales and from the Pennines, where a combination of very hardy sheep with soft wool, very soft water, combined to create wools that could create the most wonderfully comfortable, warm, insulating, luxury garments. And so English cloth, English goods, English wool was prized all over the world, or particularly across Europe rather. And so as a result of that, the merchant tailors, who the guild of course looked after, a little peeky view of the minster there, that looked after the guild of tailors, so guilds of course were trade associations that really kind of controlled the medieval city, responsible for prices, for training, for apprenticeships, for quality standards. At the end of the day, you know, if you're going to, of course, order cloth and you're based in Germany, on the Hanseatic ports, you want to make sure that when it arrives, it's going to be the quality, the colour, the shade, the length, the width, the warp, the weft, the thread count you've ordered. So consequently, trade, we talk about now in terms of sort of post-Brexit sort of trade agreements, trade has been a kind of live thing all the way through history, because, you know, it takes a long, long time to create things. Look at the nice silhouette now, the kind of minster and the hello Rev Dot, didn't you, Jan? Getting these standards right is absolutely intrinsic to trade. You can't really kind of trade without sort of standards, people knowing what it is they're going to order, obviously when it's going to arrive, what price it's going to be, etc., etc. So this was the role of the trade guilds, but they were, as Dot's on, I'm sure Dot will know, they were called confraternities. So confraternities were religious brotherhoods. Each of whom would adopt a saint. So St John the Evangelist is the saint associated with the Merchant Tailors Company. We're at Dewbury. If you go on my Jewish tours, we talk about Dewbury. The Jewish cemetery is over, just in front of us, just over there. We'll talk about that on another day, though. We're not going to delve into the Jewish history today. So the confraternities, so they would come together and pray together. They would call upon, if you like, invoke on the feast days of their saint to help them in their endeavours to get deals, make profits, and do well. But they prayed together, did business together. So the confraternities were very much kind of religious business brotherhoods. And so often you'll find a kind of nearby parish church would hold their kind of regalia. And with it, the church here was called St Helen on the Walls. And if Reverend Dot knows about a church history, but there was a church just here called St Helen on the Walls, which was sat right beside the Merchant Tailors. It was excavated in the 1960s. And it was one of the very earliest churches in York, which is kind of located there. And of course, a lot of the medieval churches have gone now. Many of them didn't really have much of a purpose after the Reformation. The dissolution of the monasteries, because they were monastic houses. And so lots of them kind of closed around that period. Others became, of course, parish churches. We didn't need as many as all the kind of various priories and religious houses had been previously. So if we'd had time, I would have taken us out to St Anthony's Garden. But as it is, we'll just look up from the top. Some of you will know, will have been in this garden before. It's a lovely little tranquil, peaceful spot in St Anthony's Hall, which we came into, if you remember, on York Unlocked. We came inside this building to talk to the pastor. But let's just take in for a moment just the flora and the fauna. Lovely kind of peaceful spot, just on the edge. So again, another guild hall, St Anthony's Hall. So each of the guild halls took them. St Cuthbert's Church, tower coming into view. St Cuthbert, very, very important early English saint, associated with Durham, of course, the Dun Cow. Remember that story? We're in Durham. Oh, look at it. Hopefully these tours reward coming on lots of them, because it's the same stories that I'm telling. So hopefully what I try to do is kind of layer up, give you little bits of tidbits, but that over time we layer those things up so that consequently you feel like you've got a pretty decent understanding. So again, let's just kind of turn around again. We get a real good size and sense of the defensive sense now of the mounds running up to the walls. And of course we can see the pathway where the moat would have run on the bottom. And the moat, of course, was also in effect a sewer. So not a nice place to be. But again, it's just a pretty useful way of keeping people you didn't want in. So by treating it as a place for effluent, again, that was another barrier to kind of cross over. Before you could even think about crossing the mound, then scaling the walls, you needed a river of effluent first. So we really did our best to keep outsiders out. So we're coming to the end of the walls. Not the end of this tour, there's a bit more to go on that, but we've got a gap now. And the reason for that is, if you remember the map I showed you right at the beginning, and hopefully Tina was asking you for a picture of the map. Hopefully there's another one here I can do for you. I can see it now. And this area was flooded, and it was called the King's Fish Pool. So between where we're going to be coming off the walls now, we're going to get back on about 5 minutes. Down there, you can see a bit of York's rip backside, as Iggy Pop would say. This was an area that was flooded. It belonged to the king, it's a King's Fish Pool. This was the place where only the king had the fish license to fish. But of course, as I've mentioned, the moats flew through this area. The moat was a public sewer. So basically the place where you caught your fish was, in effect, an outflow of a public sewer. So if that doesn't put you off, nothing much will. So we've got right the way around now to our end. So I'm going to pull back so Tina can get that shot that she was after before. So hopefully that will give you what you need. And you can see we've just got one section left to do, the bottom corner. And so that's where we're going to go. So we now have to head this area and go across. So we now need to follow the line. So for those that come to York, St Anthony's Hall and the lovely gardens are just over on our right hand side. There's a little alleyway, a little archway in the wall. You can get through there and get to the King's Fish Pool. I heartily recommend it. Lovely place to be, the garden rather, not the fish pool. And just trying to not get us run over, but get us over as fast as we can. So a rather unattractive part of the city, but we're going to have a look at the River Foss in just a moment. And river views are always welcome. So we've done that. Let's let me have a sip of water. And so the River Foss is York's second river, and the confluence of the Ouse and the Foss is where William the Conqueror decided to build his two castles. So the two rivers, if you like, separated this area. So this was very much the area that's flooded, and the River Foss still obviously follows this line. And we're going to walk in and have a look at the Foss a bit closer. But as you can see, it doesn't really have too much. Yeah, it's the old incinerator chimney, is that one, Leslie? So they built them very, very high to belch all the crap, basically as high into the sky as possible. That was the kind of the idea of the big chimneys. But you see here, the water is essentially stagnant. It's got a little bit of movement, but that's as much the breeze as anything else. You can see the ducks there sort of sitting in the middle. So consequently, there is sort of pretty ongoing problems with sort of duckweed and algae and various sort of forms of sort of organic pollutant, if you like, that basically just gum up the Foss. So at times it can look really rather unattractive and unappealing. But I've always got a bit of a soft spot for the Foss. It gets a kind of rather bad rep. I don't know, people on New York is the East River, not quite seen as the same way as the Hudson. That's very much the sort of thing here in York. The Foss is the lesser of the two rivers, the less kind of glamorous. No one goes for a pleasure cruise on the Foss. They should really. And he's got his own cleaning barge over here that he's very much kind of dedicated to getting rid of as much of the muck and the gunge as possible. It just needs doing an awful lot. But over this side, a bit cleaner, because we're coming into an area that was historically industrial. Because of course, before roads, the canals were used extensively for the movement of freight. They do look nice, don't they, Mark? I don't at all disagree. And in particular, the chocolate factories really utilised the waterways to move their goods. And so we're about to come round, and we're going to see in a moment the former Rowntree's factory. And the Rowntree's were very much like a forefront of not just chocolate production, but chocolate manufacturing. When they invented the cocoa press in the 1870s, it allowed them for the first time not simply to get cocoa extract, what they call cocoa butter, an oily sort of fatty substance, which was then used to make milk chocolate. I mean, first for chocolate powder, drinking chocolate, and sort of dried out, but eventually for milk chocolate, what they call sort of milk solids, as you might say. So cocoa butter basically brought down the price of chocolate by about probably 80%. Obviously it wasn't the best chocolate, but it was still chocolate and people liked it if you could get sugar, which increasingly was available. So you can see here now, We are at Foss Islands. So islands in the Foss. We're about to come round to Roundtree Wharf. We're going to walk down here before we join the walls again. So I think it's all right around here. I mean, I think it's much. Living in the wrong place, wrong century. It gets a bit of a bad rep, the Foss, but it's all right. I've got a swan there. Look at that. I've got a swan. You know, it's good enough for a swan. It's good enough for us, right? In fact, I've got 2 swans. Look at that. Got 2 swans. Happy days. How's it going? So 2 swans. That's gonna be a good look, right? So Rowntree's basically, we're obviously having all this sort of chocolate imported, one side of the world to the other, but with this cocoa press, they were able to make this now very affordable form of chocolate. So this is basically the cocoas and byways of England, and huge amounts of money was put into cutting the canals. So the enormous network that crisscrossed England. But chocolate buffers. Oh, sorry. Hopefully it's back now. We're back. So what I was just talking about there. Sorry, the signal is patchy, but hopefully it'll improve as we walk along. Never had no such problems. There's the Rowntree's factory over there. Hopefully that's a bit better. So you just look at the last bit on that then. So basically, the canals had been the highway infrastructure, but it's terrible. They were quickly replaced by the railways, and so canals, cheap way of disposing of it. So consequently, the canals were sort of rather unloved, and so many of them in kind of recent times have become now kind of restored and back to sort of nature, but an awful lot of it has been the place of tipping and rubbing. So I can only apologise about the differing signal around here. I mean, I've done this tour several times and never had signal issues, so I think maybe it's a Streamlabs issue this. After this tour I may well delete the app and reinstall it, because it does seem that it is incredibly shaky, but hopefully nonetheless we're getting enough of a signal, and most of it as we're going along, to warrant it being worthwhile sticking around for the final section of this tour. We really are coming very close to the final section of the walls right now, but I say it's jumping from, I'm seeing like 30 frames per second to 1 frame per second, and normally 4G doesn't behave like this, so I don't entirely know what is kind of going on, but a piece of the walls architecture, because it is the only section that is built in brick. And the reason for that is a reflection of the wealth of York at the time. York was in a really bad way, and following the Wars of the Roses, there'd been a great deal of behind, aren't we? Oh, we're back. As I've never seen this fluctuation like this before. So hopefully you can see and hear me. We're now on the walls for our final section. Walking now towards Wormgate Bar. Yeah, no one eats swans. In fact, it's illegal to eat a swan, isn't it? All swans belong to the Queen. Well, not the Queen, the King now, isn't it? Sorry, I beg your pardon. A bit outdated there, wasn't it? So yeah, all swans belong to the reigning monarch, and it is a capital offence. I don't know what happened to you. I don't know what happened. Somebody maybe look that up and find out what is the penalty for if you enjoyed a swan. What do you think should be the price for pay for that? Would you go to jail? A fine? Maybe do some community service, some volunteering looking after birds? I don't know what the penalty would be, but I'd imagine it would be a fairly stiff rebuke. They don't want you eating the king's swans, do they? So, chocolate shop in several places. That'd be a good idea, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah, the Red Tower actually, Mark, is completely covered in scaffolding, so we haven't really missed it as such. You can't sort of see it right down at the end there. It's completely covered over, so there's nothing to see. So, yes, I think the signal was down at that moment in time, but as all things, some things are out of our control. So you see on this side, the walls are a good deal lower, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? And that's because they incorporate a slope on this side. So it appears that the walls here are lower, but actually sort of taking advantage of the natural kind of geography. And we're walking our way round to the fourth and final of the major areas. We've got Wormgate Navigation Road on our kind of left hand side, Wormgate the area of York associated with Irish settlers. So the Irish community in York is sizable. The Irish diaspora, of course, covers the world. But if we look at the census returns for 1841, the census was done every sort of 10 years, the numbers of Irish workers are in the low hundreds, 130 something or other. And essentially they are seasonal workers coming over to England to work on the harvest. They're not staying here all year round. By the time we get to the 1851 census, and of course in between them, we've got the hunger, the potato famine, whatever you want to call it, happens. That number has gone up to over 3,000. So we had a very, very kind of sizable intake. And the Irish population, the Irish immigrants coming in, were all placed to live in this area around here, the Warmgate area. And they were given the worst housing, the worst conditions, the worst jobs, most insecure work and pay, which is always pretty much what happens in new immigrant groups, and were treated very shabbily indeed. To such a degree that the Quakers began to feel that actually the treatment of the Irish was inequitable, needed to be improved. And so bit by bit, this area was improved. But right until the 1970s, this was a notorious area for drinking and partying. At one time, there were over 30 pubs along Warmgate. There's still about six still to this day. But Warmgate was an area that was known for its lawlessness, for its drinking, which is perhaps no surprise then. The top of the bar, the final of the fourth bar we're going to have a look at today, was a police station at one part of its time, handily located to deal with drunkenness, disorder and mayhem. £5,000, thank you very much. So this rear section of Warmgate Bar was a police station. So we come down like a Warmgate Bar now. So Warmgate Bar, very, very impressive, because it is the only one of the four bars, the four gateways, that still retains its barbican. So if you ever wonder what a barbican is and didn't know, you're about to find out. So we're coming down the steps, once again for Tina and others. So you can see, boy, have we done some journeying now. We started down here at Castle Museum, round we went, Micklegate Bar, crossed over the river, top of Minster, round. This is where we stopped, we come back off the river. Red Tower we couldn't see because it was covered over and lost signal. We're now at Warmgate Bar. So a small section left to do. You've done fantastic. You're getting your honorary City of York badge. Yeah, ornamental cap. Oh, well, that was the Polish, unfortunately, were accused. Well, I mean, that was true. It wasn't even much an accusation, more of a cultural difference. In Poland and Eastern Europe, when people fish for carp, they eat it. In this country, we throw it back. So it was just something they needed to learn. And Anglers associations work with the Polish communities, and soon that was dealt with. Now, for those that like my cat tours, here's one that should be too far from the centre to get in, but absolutely lovely. There we go, a little ray of sunshine for us. Oops. Aren't they absolutely lovely? See, there's a cultural difference that really. It's not. I don't think it was sort of particularly controversial to say it happened. But so on here we've got exactly a cat. So original city gates. So we thought, haven't we, about city gates being opened with portcullises. So this is wonderful. Look at this original medieval timber. What's different here is instead of walking out and there being a portcullis, we see the spikes here, so we're seeing these now, 4 portcullises, and that being the end. Instead, we've got this, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is a barbican. So a barbican is a second set of gates. It is a defensive structure that is there to make it very, very difficult to attack a city gates, because as we come out of here, you'll see what I'm going to talk about in a minute. It's just the bikes go very fast. I'm just trying to make sure I'm safe. So you can see there's the inner gates, and then you've got the main gate. This is the barbican. So 3 of these in York were pulled down. Only 1 still survives. But wow, isn't it fantastic that it does? 3 in Europe, 1 in Dijon, 1 in Krakow, 1 in York. So you can see what the impact of it is. If you're going to try to attack those city gates, need to be funneled into that space. And of course you've got defending soldiers on the sides, on the top of the tower, that can rain down everything from hot sand, boiling water, stones, spikes, you name it, stabbing down. You could be attacking the attackers. So consequently, it makes you very, very vulnerable. So that's what the Barbican did. The Barbican was an extra form of defences for the gates. As I say, only 3 are left in Europe. So isn't it wonderful that one of them is here at York? So let us go up onto the walls for our final section of this tour. And by the end of this, you'll quite literally have walked the walls. Whether you've done it in person or not, you've done it much better. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously that's where the Barbican was in London. You know, and of course, the walls in London, or getting a Ludgate Circus down that way, that was the kind of line. The Old Bailey, the line of the castle walls, the Old Bailey. So the London Castle was down there. So consequently, all that area of London was very much to do with a castle, but all gone now. Of course, a little bit of London was down by the Barbican, but like most cities, they were pulled down in the 19th century because, by and large, commerce gets what commerce wants, and commerce viewed walls, gateways, particularly Barbicans, as being obstructions to trade. They wanted the free movement of raw materials coming in, finished goods coming out, and so consequently these medieval structures were just a nuisance. And you know, the progressive mindset is always, let's just give commerce what it wants. Not least because often the politicians are the industrialists, aren't they? They're the merchants. The people that get to make a decision on what's going and what's staying are generally the people who've got a financial vested interest. That's been the history of decision making, isn't it? So just go around again, get another view now. The lights start to come down. Thanks, Robin. Nearly 2 hours in. We're going to get done. Minster. And a rather more modern landmark over here. But this is a... Hello, Rose. We're not far from the end, but you're welcome to join us. What left you have on this tour? And this hotel over here, this apartment hotel, has only a fairly recent arrival in York, but it has a rather unusual claim to fame, which means I suspect it won't be forgotten, but I also suspect that it's not something they particularly choose to advertise, because it's at this very apartment hotel that 2 Chinese people were staying in the spring, I think the February was it, of 2020, is that right? Anyway, the very first cases of COVID-19 from people staying in this apartment hotel here in York, 2 Chinese students. And of course, those Chinese students had flown international on a plane full of other people, infected lots of them, and before we even knew what was happening, the disease had arrived in this country. But this is where they were staying. So of course a whole bunch of other people here as well came into contact. So York was initially a bit of a hot spot for COVID, and of course there didn't mean any way to kind of detract from this, because those people that caught COVID in the early days, many of them have got terribly poor outcomes, are still suffering obviously to this day, because of long COVID and so forth. I think the treatments and the approach to how we deal with COVID changed markedly over the kind of year, 18 months, didn't it, before the vaccine kind of came along, however long that period of time was. So I think those that caught it early on were very unfortunate. But yeah, the first documented cases anywhere in the UK were right here at that hotel. So I suspect they won't be celebrating that. It's probably not on their website, I would guess. I could be wrong. Maybe they sort of see it as a quirky bit of folk history in years to come. So York's Barbican, so the music venue. Over the other side again, you can't really see the foliage on this side, but York's music venue, where they also have the snooker, UK snooker championships, one of the 3 main snooker championships held every November, December, is held there. But of course named after the Barbican, which is where we are now. And the last of the mini gates, we're going to come down, go back up, so I'll just show you, is Fishergate Bar. So again, like Victoria Bar, one of the minor gateways, one of the gateways that was used to generate income So by creating a gateway into the walls, it was an opportunity to charge taxes. So we know in 1296 it was 1 penny fee per trolley load, but half of 1p if it was loaded in Yorkshire. So we looked after our own. We charged the outsiders more to come and do business here, encouraging, I suppose, money staying in the local economy. But nonetheless, you couldn't bring your goods into York to sell. Livestock, 4p a head. So whether those livestock sold for a great price or a poor price, didn't matter. York got its cut, or rather, the moorage master got his cut. So these were the masters of the gates. And these were the people whose job it was to invest then the money that had been earned into the upkeep of the gates. And absolutely, of course it wouldn't, Michelle. So this Fishergate postern, Fishergate gate here, Fishergate bar, we can see there, again, nicely painted crest. The last one of our gates on 10% battery. So let's get round to the postern and to the end, so you can demonstrate that we have done the full route. You're not going to accuse me of short-changing you. My batteries run out. How people do these 3-hour tours, I've no idea, because my battery, maybe it's because I use radio mics which run off phone battery as well. Maybe they do other things, but I like the sound of radio mics. I think it sounds better. So yeah, so Michelle, if you hadn't been here, would have been somewhere else. The COVID situation. So it's just kind of quirky. It's because I suppose so much of what I talk about on these tours, these things that happened such a long time ago, that to be able to talk about something that happened, you know, in the last 5 years, that's nonetheless got a kind of national significance, even kind of by default, if you like, then it's kind of nice to weave that in, because otherwise we just talk about things that happened a long, long time ago, as if history stopped, and of course it doesn't. History is evolving all the time. So coming around into the very, very final sections of the wall, I think I've more than earned myself a cold beer after this. By the way, of course, on this compared to Hago, I can't see when you've left gratuities. I do appreciate it so much, believe me. I do. I don't tour all that much, as that many will know. I'm very involved in running the guides, not running, but doing what I can to help other guides. Coming to have listed 500 tours for free for other guides. We are going to have to change that model quite soon, but I'm very proud of the work that we've done. The guides that had the resources, had the followings, have paid to keep the show on the road so that others could benefit. Those with the smaller followings could keep going. We're launching our website pretty soon. Some good news coming about branding. But I'm proud that we kind of stood up and have kept this thing going. So thank you for everybody that supports the calendar. It has been the main source of the activity. That'll be migrating across to a website before sort of too long. But it is a a really kind of valid thing, and I really hope that you recognise what the guides have done. The group and the collective have paid money each month so that everybody else, so the tours could be free to join for the most part, and the other guides, without the following, without the support that we had, don't need to pay. That, of course, isn't sustainable in the long term, but hopefully it's been enough to enable people to keep touring, for us to keep this going, so that now looking forward, building a website, we can look forward and know that we've got a model that works. So we've come off on the fun thing. So thank you, Rosemary. We think it's amazing too, and the best thing we can ask anybody to do now is to support the website, support the Shade Calendar, and of course, any website that wants to, the Facebook group wants us to promote what we do. That's lovely, but we think that alternative calendars is a bad idea. We think it confuses people, and so we really would encourage now the focus to go in to get a return on the investment, so that we can ensure that we can carry on. Because obviously, what we didn't want was guys going off just doing their own thing. It's been very, very easy for those with the largest followings, but instead we've shown faith and support in our fellow guides, and so hopefully you'll all kind of repay that by sticking with us in this age. The last bit, we could have been quite literally in the shit with what Hago did, and if we were, it would have come out of this pipe, because what we're looking at here is a medieval toilet. As we know, this would have been into water. One and all, absolutely, Leonie, one for all, one for all. So I'm going to cross over so you can see the postern tower. It's the last section before we go back into the flooded section, the moat surrounding So we've got the tower over here, and let us come round. So you're going to see in a minute the Foss Basin. I talked about the castle being at the confluence of the two rivers. So we've got the Ouse is in front of us. We're about to cross over the Foss. So these come together in like a sort of triangle, sort of pincer, as you might say. So this confluence, this is where they decided to build the castle. The two castles. Remember, there's two, one on either side of the river. So we've got the Foss. We're crossing over here, the Foss Basin, on the kind of left-hand side. And thank you, Linda. We did what needs to be done. And as I say, thank you for everybody for the support. So sorry I can't say thank you mid-tour for those that have left consideration. Those that can't, I know when you will. So don't worry about that. But everybody that does, it is really, really valuable. And it helps me to help other guides and make sure that they are able to keep doing tours, even on kind of fairly modest earnings, because it's very, very affordable to them. So yeah, Leslie, don't worry, we're going to try and build as much as we can. It'll be in phases, bit by bit, won't be all in one go, but we'll have that. So we're coming back round now. We've finished the walls, but just to make sure that you know, I've not cheated, I've not diddled you, I've not sold you short. That where will we start? We started, if you remember, by Clifford's Tower, and we've gone all the way around the city. You've seen an awful lot of York today on this tour. I've never done this tour before. I'm only finishing 4 minutes late, which I don't think is at all bad, given what can happen on these tours and drop signals and so forth. So I do hope that you feel that you've had value for money today, and that this has been a good tour, a nice chat, a good way to spend your Sunday, and proof, if any were needed, hoving interview, that that here we are back at the castle, and so you can now see that you've done the entire ring around York. And I feel that I have just about worn myself out my breath. Thank you, I agree, Tish, thank you for your company as well, both now in tours gone by and hopefully in the future as well. Mark, Kathleen, Linda, thank you very much, everybody. So as I say, allow me to say thank you publicly now for those that have made a donation, and as I say, for those that haven't today, don't worry, I know you all when you can. It's about everybody giving a bit when they can, not everybody giving something every time. So thank you so much to York. I know I'm about to run out of battery, so let us just see. We may run out, but if I can just get us across, we'll just finish up by the river. I do need a drink, and we'll just see if we can just finish up by the river, which is always my favourite place to finish up, spend time together, and just allow the gentle ebb and flow of the river just to calm us and to give thanks, I suppose, for want of a better expression. Perhaps we have Rev Dot leading this, but for companionship, for friendship, for what we bring to one another, that for those that maybe not as socially active as they once were, of what a wonderful thing this has been for us all, and that it was worth fighting for, to keep, to maintain, and know going forward, hopefully, to grow. So let's just take a moment right at the end of this tour, stand by the river, and have a little moment of reflection. So from here, the city of York, so thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to see you all again very, very soon.